Coming up, he served as his state's 44th governor. Will he become our nation's 45th president? He shares the same hometown as a previous president, but not the same party label. And he says the time he spent in a pulpit has uniquely prepared him to serve as president. He's Governor Mike Huckabee, and he's the focus of this Newsmax Prime special, starting right now. Hello and welcome to this Newsmax Prime special, a conversation with Mike Huckabee. I'm J.D. Hayworth. Thanks for joining us. Michael Dale Huckabee served as the 44th governor of Arkansas from 1996 until 2007, becoming one of that state's longest-serving chief executives. A former pastor, Governor Huckabee is a man of faith and says he will never apologize for his convictions and his values. His campaign slogan is, "From hope to higher ground." Hope, a reference to his hometown of Hope, Arkansas, also the birthplace of former President Bill Clinton, and higher ground, the place he believes he can lead America. Governor Huckabee sat down with me on the campaign trail in Iowa, and in this exclusive, wide-ranging interview, we began by asking him how a former pastor might one day become President of the United States. He says that calling actually molded his candidacy.
First of all, I'm not running for president because 25, 30 years ago I was a pastor. I was a lieutenant governor. I was 10 and a half years a governor, repeatedly elected in the most democratic state in all of America, fought against the Clinton machine to get there, to stay there, and to survive there, and to succeed there. But even beyond that, I would also remind them that there is no job in the world, period, that better prepares a person to understand the frailties and realities of human life than being a pastor. The 12 years I was a pastor, which by the way was not my first career, it was my second. My first career was broadcasting, radio, television, advertising. Then I went into the pastorate for 12 years and it was like graduate school for me. But here's what I learned. I was in a job in which I saw the best and worst of humanity. I saw it from the cradle to the grave. There is not a social pathology in all the world that I couldn't put a name and a face to. So if you want to ask me about young teenage girls getting pregnant, I could tell you I talked to those girls before they went and told their parents they were pregnant. What about elderly people who have run out of money and they're having to decide between medicine or food? I knew those people. I was in their home. I was with those families when the children had to become the parents of their aging parents. I was there at the bedside when people had to make the decision to turn off life support. I counseled their sons and daughters through drug addiction when they were teenagers, and I watched people who did everything from commit suicide to go through the most horrible moments of life. I also saw them at their best. I was the guy who looked out there in the church and people that everyone thought were the epitome of perfection. I knew the dark secrets about them that no one else knew, no one but God. And I cannot tell you how much that changed my understanding of human beings in a good way.
There are always some surprises. It would appear right now that one such surprise is Donald Trump. Your take on the entry of Mr. Trump into this mix of Republican candidates?
He's as welcome to the race as anyone else. I'm certainly not taking the bait on commenting on what he said or what he should have said, because look, I'm making speeches every day. I'm happy to comment on those. I couldn't start commenting on the other 374 Republicans running for office, because then I'd never get my message out there. I'd be just commenting on somebody else's message. So Republicans need to focus on what they're doing, why they're running, swim in their own lane. This is the Olympics. This is the big league. Don't jump in somebody else's lane and swim on top of them. Just get over in your lane and swim, do your swim, and let people judge at the end whether or not you're the gold medalist.
I hate to mention these two words together. It's almost vice president.
Which guy were you thinking about to serve with me?
That's obviously the proactive attitude. Let me reverse the paradigm. Is there anyone with whom you would not serve running now were circumstances to indicate that the number one slot might not come your way?
Well, I'm not even thinking in terms of it. Let me say, nobody runs for office to take second place. There's no prize for second place. And I've been through this process before. I came in second to McCain in 2008 in the Republican primary. There was no particular advantage to that. And I'm not running to, be the vice president. I'm not running to be a cabinet member. As I've told people, there's only one address in Washington, D.C. that I have any interest in residing in. And if that one's not available, then right now I don't have any other plans whatsoever.
What is the biggest lesson you learned between your experience in 2008 running for this job and where you are now?
I think the biggest thing I learned is that be patient in this process. I watch a lot of guys that are in it for the first time. There is a sense of which they allow the press to crack the whip and get them to react to things and schedule things and do things because they feel like that all is going to be decided in July of 2015 before the first caucus votes even cast in February of next year. I learned very, very clearly that this is a marathon. It is not a sprint. And one has to be methodical, thorough, and take this one step at a time. Lay out your plan. And the old saying I remembered as a kid in Sunday school when I was 6 years old, plan your work, work your plan. Don't worry about what somebody else is doing at this point. Don't get all shaken up because the polls are up one day and down the next. Plan your work, work your plan. Stay on your feet. Keep your message sincere, honest, thorough, and get out there and get voters one at a time. That's how you win.
Having been through this process before, Governor Mike Huckabee knows the importance of staying on message. And judging from our conversation, he's using those lessons he's learned on the campaign trail this time around. Newsmax wants to hear which candidate has your vote. Is it Mike Huckabee, Donald Trump, Scott Walker, or someone else? Cast your vote for your Republican nominee at newsmaxpolls.com and let us know. We'll be right back. Welcome back to this Newsmax Prime special, a conversation with Mike Huckabee. You could say that two of the most vexing issues confronting our nation come at us right between the eyes: Iran and illegal immigration. Governor Huckabee outlined the steps he would take to deal with both, and they differ greatly from the current administration. It appears the current president has an indulgent attitude toward Iran, so much so that they're moving forward with this agreement, an agreement Franklin Graham has said is essentially a death sentence for Israel. Do you agree with what Franklin Graham has said?
Well, I'd take it one step further. It's not just a death sentence for Israel. Let's remember that they were chanting in the streets and in the parliament, even as they were negotiating this deal. They were chanting death to America. This is not just about Israel. This is about us. Israel is only the warm-up act. It's the opening act, but the headliner is America. Iran has never, ever hidden that their ultimate agenda is death to America. Why we sat down at the table with these guys, why we ever negotiated with terrorists makes no sense to me. Let's go further. We got nothing out of this. I read all 159 pages of the document. We didn't even get 4 hostages released. John Kerry admitted that they talked about it. He said they did anyway. Every time they met, and they never got any of that. That should have been a precondition before they ever sat down at the table and said, look, as an act of good faith on your part, you let those 4 Americans out of prison right now. Let us fly them home. And then we'll talk about talking. Till that happens, there is no discussion. In fact, here's what we're going to do. We're going to increase the sanctions. We're going to make it much tougher for you. We're going to bust and bankrupt you unless you start behaving like a member of the world community. They didn't do that. They gave up nothing. They won. We acted like people driving in a brand new Lexus to the car lot and trading it in even for a 15-year-old Yugo. No wonder the Iranians are dancing in the streets. And we're over here scratching our heads saying, what did we just do?
Well, not in terms of what he has been saying, but in terms of response. It appears he has definitely struck a nerve on illegal immigration. What is the Mike Huckabee policy on illegal immigration?
Seal the border within a year, which I believe I will do. And here's why. I've heard people wring their hands and act like, well, we can't do that. Well, of course we can. JD, 73 years ago, we built a road between British Columbia and Alaska, a 1,700-mile road in some of the most difficult terrain and difficult weather conditions on Earth, and we did it in less than a year. And that was with the engineering capability of 73 years ago. Think about being able to build a secure border. We can do that, and we certainly can do it in less than a year. So that's what we should do. It's what I've pledged to do as president. It's what I will do.
There's been so much talk from the open borders enthusiasts that families are torn asunder by illegal immigration. Governor, is it time to consider a compassionate way to reunite those families in their country of origin?
Well, that's up for those families to decide, but we have laws and people need to abide by them. Until we secure the border, nothing else matters. And I think sometimes we get ahead of ourselves. We want to say, what's step two? Well, step one is secure the border. People don't take our laws seriously because we don't enforce them. And we don't enforce laws if we don't enforce the border. Step one, enforce that border. Step two, if people break the law once they are here, there should be no question about the consequences of that. They should have to go home. Now, sending them home doesn't work if the border isn't secure, because then you have the case, like we did in California, where the guy was captured, sent back, captured, sent back. But it's an open door. He just keeps coming, and 6 times later, he then murders a young 32-year-old beautiful girl who's just out with her dad. That should never have happened. JD, it wouldn't have happened had that border been secure. So that's where it all starts, right there.
When I was serving in Congress, George W. Bush came to Arizona to sign the Secure Fence Act. The fence has not been built.
Right.
Would President Huckabee waive Davis-Bacon requirements, do whatever was necessary to build the border fence?
It's not even about waiving requirements. It's just about saying this is a priority and we're going to get it done. Frankly, it would put some Americans to work who could use the work. We've already seen instances of when a border that is secured works. San Diego, your former colleague, my good friend, Duncan Hunter, worked hard to get the funding to put a secure border around San Diego, and it dramatically changed and transformed the whole nature of what was happening with illegal immigration around San Diego, because he just had the good sense to say, look, we got to protect the border. They did it. That, to me, is a great reminder that border security works. I've been in Israel dozens and dozens of times. First time is 42 years ago. A few years ago, I got in a helicopter and I flew the entire length of the Israeli security fence, the fence that caused them to be just brutalized and pilloried in the international media. They were condemned for it. But they went from 1,000 suicide bombings a year in which radicals would come across their open border and put bombs and kill little kids in cafes and schools and school buses. They went from 1,000 a year to 0 a year. 0! They ended the suicide bombing because they control their border. This is something that not only I know we can do, I know we must do.
Back with more of my exclusive interview with Mike Huckabee right after this. Faith, family, and freedom. 3 of the guiding principles that led Mike Huckabee to again seek the presidency. He believes the values he represents reach far beyond the so-called values voters, and had this to say when I asked him about those troubling Planned Parenthood videos that were recently released.
I was appalled, sickened by it. The words were bad enough, but the context made it even more chilling. Here is a doctor casually chomping on her salad, fork in hand, wine glass in another, talking about how they were careful not to crush the thorax because it might damage the liver, the heart, and the kidneys that they could use for organ harvest and sell those organs. Instead, they would crush the lower body extremities and they would crush the head. They were careful not to crush the most valuable parts, but describing essentially the trafficking of human body parts. If anybody can watch that and not turn away in disgust, that person has a seared conscience They have lost the capacity for any sense of moral outrage. God help them. As president, there would be no funding for Planned Parenthood. None. $540 million, and they justify saying it's for women's health. There's nothing that they do, which is very little for women's health, that couldn't be done by better and more responsible providers rather than these butchers who go out there and justify and defend the slaughter of children and the selling of their parts. And it's time for us to get honest. Let's end this scourge of abortion. 55 million unborn children have died in what ought to be the safest place in the world, their mother's womb. And I think that we, as a culture, as a civilization, need to come to grips with the evil of this practice, and we need to end it.
More family issues, specifically marriage. The Supreme Court ruling, you've been quoted as saying, pastors and others need to be prepared to engage in civil disobedience.
Yes.
Tell me what you mean, and tell me, do you think it's going to come down to the federal government ordering pastors to conduct same-sex weddings?
It's headed that direction. When people say, oh no, that's not going to happen. It already is happening at the lead-up when bakers, photographers, T-shirt makers, florists, caterers are told that they have to participate in something that violates their conscience and their biblical orthodoxy. Then it's not very far till we start telling schools you can't be accredited if you don't support the notion of same-sex marriage and if you won't include that in your curriculum. It means to a college you can't get a Pell Grant for your students. You're not going to get any assistance for your campus. It means to adoption agencies. Imagine what happens to hospitals if they can't be accredited hospitals because no government agency will officially give their approval because they don't practice a support for same-sex marriage. Churches losing tax-exempt status. Economic terrorism already being applied to people across America. Fines of $135,000 to a wedding cake maker for the simple just denial of making a wedding cake for a same-sex couple. JD, here's what we have to finally do is elect a president who says the Supreme Court's not the supreme being. And they're not even the supreme branch. They're Supreme Court, but they're not above the other two branches of government. There is no legislation that has ever passed Congress signed by a president that authorizes same-sex marriage, and there's nothing in the Constitution. Justice Kennedy reached out and made up some rights like intimacy and spirituality. That's not constitutional.
Along those lines then, should Anthony Kennedy be impeached?
Should never have been appointed, perhaps. Whether he should be impeached, he should be ignored. I think we're missing something here. I hear people say, well, there's nothing we can do. It's the law of the land. We're just now bound by it. No, we're not. My gosh, what if Abraham Lincoln had said, well, Dred Scott passed, black people aren't real people, they're not full people, therefore there's nothing we can do. That's the law of the land. What if he had done that? I mean, does anybody think that would have been the proper course for Abraham Lincoln to have taken as it related to the dignity, the worth, and the value of people of color? My God, nobody in this country says that. He decided that Dred Scott was morally and unconstitutionally a wrong decision of the court, and he ignored it. When is a president going to have the courage to say that until the elected people's representatives vote for it, and a president signs it and agrees to enforce it, the Supreme Court cannot make up a law? They don't have that power. If they do have that power, and there is no check and balance to that power, then let's remember the words of Jefferson, who told us that that kind of unchecked power on the part of the judiciary would be judicial tyranny. And that's what we've surrendered to, and it's fundamentally wrong and unconstitutional.
History reminds us that a man of the cloth, Frederick Muhlenberg, became the first Speaker of the House. Mike Huckabee hopes to make history himself in 2016, having earlier answered the call to preach from the pulpit. He now hopes to serve in the post Theodore Roosevelt called the bully pulpit. Will Governor Huckabee become President Huckabee? He certainly feels at home with millions of Americans who invited him into their homes as host of a weekly program telecast nationally for several years. And his balance of strength and compassion, when combined with his mastery of the media, could very well lead to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. This has been a Newsmax Prime special. I'm J.D. Hayworth. Thanks for watching.